So hello fellow photographers, in this week's video we're discussing a common problem that interior and architecture photographers face, and that is lens flare. So this video has been released in conjunction with my new series shot in village mosques in Turkey, the country of course that I'm now based. I had a great time exploring the country, getting to know the villages, and had much fun trying to go out there and actually photograph these spaces. You can imagine me rocking up with my camera gear, drone, camera, bag, pulling up in a tiny village, sometimes with just two men and a dog, to photograph these kind of spaces. So despite the quality or cost of your lenses, lens flare can be a problem in interior and architecture photography. And this morning when I was photographing this place, it's exactly what was happening to me. So of course, when you're rocking up in a location like this, you could plan in terms of which orientation the building sits in relation to the sun. But the problem is, in these tiny villages in Turkey, there's not that much Google Earth action going on. Like when you zoom on in, there's a lot of detail loss. That led to me not knowing which direction exactly the windows would face in this mosque in terms of the light coming in this morning, and that's a shame for me actually. So I had to wait out more hours here than I initially anticipated, waiting for this sun to move away from the key subjects. So lens flare occurs when light enters the lens and creates a bright and often distracting glare in your images. So light like this can be wow factor, but it can also be very distracting and of course soften up the edges of your very sharp and beautiful interiors. So the type of light that you're looking at here right now is specular flare. This is where the light comes in directly and enters the camera's lens, creating this kind of like sometimes purple, sometimes light glows. Usually it's created of course by light sources such as the sun or bright light sources. It could be lighting as well, entering that camera's lens. So in portrait work, for example, that can be worked to your advantage. It can work really well and look great. In interiors, the same can happen. It can look amazing with this kind of light at times. But this morning, that was not the case for me. So the next type of flare is bounced flare, and it's difficult to obtain that in this particular mosque. So bounced flare is a little bit different, but basically that's when it enters the space, bounces off a shiny surface or a subject like a mirror or glass, and then reflects back and creates kind of like a flare across your lens as well. And that can happen with glasses, mirrors, it could be chandeliers like I had this morning in this mosque. So these two light sources like this in video can look stunning as you've seen in the clips. But in photography, we usually want to try and eliminate them or use them creatively and actually make them look impressive. None of them looked impressive this morning when I was trying to photograph both compositions that I had in mind for this structure. But it must be said that not all lenses are created equal when it comes to balancing out and avoiding some of this flare or help to counteract it. It depends on price point, quality, it also depends on the coating on the lens, and also just in terms of like what sort of lens it is that you've purchased. Is it a wide angle? Is it a zoom lens? Is it kind of a prime, and does it handle that lens flare in a particular way? Certain coatings that apply to the lenses, especially not all older ones are worse, but it just depends on the quality, the age, and also in terms of how you've handled it and cared for it over time as well. And how they produce and manufacture some of these lenses now really does help to counteract that. In fact, people buy film lenses, older ones, for lens flare elements in their scenes if they want to do it creatively in video work perhaps. So the lens I'm actually using now has actually got a high resistance to flare. This is a 15 to 35 f2.8 by Canon. It's the RF version, and that's pretty good at handling lens flare. Even still, if the camera's position isn't right and if the light is very strong, you're still going to get that into your results. And another reason why you'd want to avoid this kind of lens flare is autofocus. Now I've got a very high-end Canon R5 and it's got an amazing autofocus system. I'm filming on it here now, but as I move around and I create this, there is times, as you can see, where the lens actually struggles with that light flare coming in to pick me up, depending on the contrast in the scene. So light like this, strong light like this, is creating kind of a flatter scene, less contrast, and that's how these autofocus systems work. And for us, that can be a problem in architecture photography, and that can really impact our time on site if this light is creating havoc with your autofocus system. It could be that you switch to manual, or it could be that you need to work around it. But don't worry, there are several ways to combat this lens flare and still capture stunning architecture photos. Let's dive in. Let's move on to the tips then, things that we can do to improve the kind of lens flare we're getting into our lens and make it an optional thing rather than something that's thrown upon us and we can't deal with it. The first thing I would mention, of course, would be the type of lens you're using. We've discussed that a little bit already. Do you have an option for another lens? Do you have an option for, say, a newer or better lens if you're trying to avoid lens flare? Are you trying to create it? In which case, maybe you want to opt for a lens that kind of like flares up a little bit more. There's a lens that does spring to mind with this that used to be really bad with flare, and that would be the Sigma 12-24. I remember that lens a few years back used to be pretty bad at handling the kind of flare coming in. It used to go crazy. My 17mm tilt shift, for example, doesn't handle flare very well. Of course, it's got a bulbous element, and any lens that has that bulbous element will be worse at kind of handling that light. So that would be my first thing. Can you change lenses? There is also, of course, a relationship between aperture, the aperture that you're selecting, and the lens flare. If you push your lens wide open, say f2.8, that's going to create a larger hole in your lens, and aperture blades are going to open up. It's going to let more light in, and of course, accelerate this lens flare. If you close your lens down and stop it down, so say f11, then that's going to have a smaller hole and should, in theory, but not always, create less lens flare. These are things we can do. So aperture would be the first point of call in terms of things we can do to avoid it. Are you shooting at the right aperture? Can you adjust just a little bit, push it down just one stop either side without creating havoc with your image, of course, to be able to kind of eliminate some of this lens flare. So the most obvious way to avoid this lens flare then would be to change your angle, move around, change your position, move yourself somewhere where the lens isn't pointing directly into the light or creating this lens flare. Now those compositional changes might be subtle. You might not need huge shifts with your tripod. It could be that actually you just need to raise or lower your center column, or you just need to zoom in and out to be able to change that composition a slight bit to avoid that lens flare. So in architecture photography, we're usually hooked on kind of composition and getting things straight lines and angles in camera. However, if it's a case of getting an image or not, it could be a case of just tilting that camera ever so slightly to avoid the lens flare. These days, it's easy to correct in post. Subtle changes like this can easily help eliminate some of that nasty flare. The next one is quite simple as well. Is to make sure that you actually clean any smudge marks off the front element of your lens. To be honest with you, there's been times, especially with some of my tilt shift lenses, where I've gone to take images, seen a horrible mark coming across them, usually purple or some sort of weird glowing. I look at the front of the lens and there's a huge thumbprint in it. So yeah, make sure you clean them. So my next tip would be a piece of gear, and it would be a lens hood. At the moment, you can kind of see my composition. It's kind of looking sharpish. It's looking kind of contrasty. If I take this hood off, look at the difference it's going to make at this particular angle. You can kind of see this glow happening here on my chest, and this kind of overall kind of softer feel because of the way the camera's position is to that sun outside. However, when we put it on, if we screw it all the way, it doesn't alter it too much at all. But if we just unclip it a little bit and roll it back a tiny fraction, the difference is huge. Of course, don't do it too much because you'll start to see it appear in the bottom corner of your lens. But just a subtle adjustment can make a huge difference. Of course, lens hoods as well double up, and they stop you from banging your camera gear, your expensive lens, on architecture as you're moving around photographing, and trust me, I've done that so many times. So the next one, while we're talking about kind of creating a lens hood effect, would be to cast a shadow over the front element of the lens. If I put my hand here, you can see my face instantly, and what it's doing, it's actually blocking the light and creating a much contrastier image. We can do that in the field. You could use your hand, like so. You could use a hat, piece of clothing. You could even use something around you, actually in the architecture itself, to block the light or create the kind of effect that you're looking for. One other thing as well that can really assist you with lens flare is a polarizer filter. Polarizer filter in architecture is used quite a bit. I'm doing a video, upcoming video actually, all about polarizer filters and why you should use them in architecture and photography, so look out for that as well. But ultimately, they can assist you with lens flare and with issues you're having with glare and things like this. Okay, I need to get on and photograph then. My light has shifted, my light has moved. And I'm hoping to avoid some of that lens flare that I faced earlier. Fingers crossed. I need to get on today. I've got loads to do, so let's hope that I can get some good images. Let's shoot together. Of course, photography is all about, architecture photography in particular, is all about patience and timing, and it's not 100% better now. There's still like a light pattern on the floor over there, but I can't wait around here much longer now today. So now I've hit my time limit. So realistically, I need to get a shot here and move on, or try and use it creatively, which I'm going to try and do both. Here, put my camera positioned close together, get a bit more height. There was originally the light coming in at this angle here, and it's creating lens flare at the top of my lens here. So that has moved, because the sun was a lot lower in the sky. It's shifting off. It's going to disappear over there, and the light's going to move completely soon. These are not, I've noticed during my travels for these things, these mosques, they're some of the worst lined up stuff that I've done to date. Worse than Soviet stuff, worse than actually most things that I've photographed to date. They're quite wonky. They're wood after all. My aim here is to create a panoramic, left, middle and right. And I've spent time trying to compose this image. Whenever I walk into a site for the first time, I'm trying to assess the situation. Is it going to work well for me? Is this lens flare going to create a problem? And if I can work with it, I will. And what I mean by that is my best print sales over the years have come from images that I've created where I've used that light to my advantage, the kind of lens flares, the rays. It could even be that there's kind of light coming in and creating a pattern from the window on the floor, stained glass, that kind of thing. So those kind of images always do really, really well. However, in commercial work, it might be that your client says to you, no, we need proper images of that kitchen, of that living room, of that saloon. And unfortunately, it might mean that you have to return or wait it out, which is kind of what I'm doing this morning. I'm waiting for the light to move as I'm recording this YouTube video, and that's going to play into my advantage when it comes to photographing this building. If you know where the light is and you know how to use it, you can actually create amazing architecture work. So I'm lining up a kind of creative, crazy shot. And there's horrible light on the floor down here in this position. But I'm going to heavily crop this image so it doesn't matter. But what does matter is here, there's flare coming in from the light over here. Not much, because the direction of the light is actually this direction, but there's just a harsh light coming in here and it's creating a flare, just a soft one here on this side. So I'm going to use the hand technique for this particular image. I've framed up, I'm ready to go, and like I said, it's going to be heavily cropped, and I'll put my hand in the frame, I'm taking the images and I'm shifting my lens down. Because this is bulbous 17mm, it's doing that problem. There is a composition to be had here, but working with it and trying to get it, that's been a battle that I've been doing all morning, literally all morning. So, as you're going to see, the technique of putting the hand up, blocking the glare and creating a shadow over the lens worked wonders. I really like the panoramic image I've created here, top, middle and bottom. Portrait orientation, it looks fantastic. It was much easier to edit this one than it was the previous. And that was because the in-camera technique helped us to maintain a really nice raw file. The first image was much more challenging. It's backlit, there was light coming in behind the chandelier and creating this glow. so it needed gentle post-processing. So I mentioned post-processing there for a second, and that gives me a great opportunity to jump in and tell you about the post-processing of this entire new series. Now, I incorporated a new tool into my workflow to help me bring this series alive. The guys over at Luminar Neo reached out to me around about a year ago, and I've been testing their products thoroughly to try to incorporate them into my workflow. So Luminar Neo actually has some amazing tools for interior and architecture photographers. Exposure blending, HDR techniques of course are in there, focus stacking, and then cataloguing your images to be able to kind of look through them and select ones you want to keep, the keepers, the ones to chuck away. I didn't use any of those though for this final series. I used primarily all of their tools they've got available to color grade my images. And with their actual package, I was able to go through and start toning these mosque images to put it together in my final results. And they are fantastic. If you like what you've seen in any of my images in the final results, then check out their discount codes below. These discount codes will give you a hefty discount actually on their 1 month, 1 year, 2 year and lifetime plans. So yeah, grab the offer today, go down, grab the coupon code, go over to their website, and if you like what you see, chuck it in, it'll give you a huge discount. And that pretty much wraps me up for today. So I hope you've enjoyed it. Until next time, guys, bye-bye for now. Yeah, I need to get out of here. I've been here for hours and hours being patient.